Let's turn this week to talk about friendship as a spiritual discipline and in connection to how we perceive ourselves um, in the parish, friendships in the parish, particularly for ministers, can be a really touchy subject. So I want to spend a little time there. We're going to begin by talking about how our culture perceives friendship versus what real friendship looks like, and then develop a theology of friendship and look at finally the spirituality of friendship as a school of Christian love. Early Christian views of friendship were largely shaped by pre Christian views, particularly Aristotle and Cicero. Aristotle and Cicero in the ancient world connected friendship to moral development and to virtue. Aristotle, particularly in his Nicomachean Ethics, um, devotes a great deal in books 8 and 9 to friendship as the school for virtue. We learn virtue in our friendships and from our friends and with our friends. Early Christians adopted Aristotle's view. In fact, Paul's letter to the Philippians is largely an early Christian adaptation of Aristotle's views, um, because there was, for early Christians, a real burning question. Is it possible then, because of the connection that friendship has to moral development and to virtue, is it possible for Christians to have real friendships with non Christians? The question turns on what type of friendship it is that you have. For Aristotle, there were three types of friendship. There's the friendship of utility, where it's a quid pro quo. I get something from you, and you get something from me, and therefore we call ourselves friends. The clearest example of a utilitarian friendship is the kid in high school who has the first car in the social group. The one with the first car is the one that everybody goes to for rides. So that person's circle of friendship kind of balloons, but it's entirely contingent upon their ability to provide a ride. Utilitarian friendships, there's nothing wrong with them, Aristotle says, but they do exist, and you need to understand them based on their own terms, because if you have a utilitarian friendship and you think of it as a genuine friendship, then you're going to be disappointed at nearly every turn, because there's nothing in that friendship other than what that person or you can get out of the friendship. Next to utilitarian friendships, there are friendships that involve uh, love, and those romantic kinds of friendships have a deeper bond to them, um, but they're still not virtuous. There's something about shared visions and shared insights. Um, two one soul inhabiting two bodies, as Aristotle puts it. There's something about that in calling it a friendship. But what are you getting from it? What are they getting from you? Well, um, there's an emotional dependency. There's the feeling. There's the transitoriness of it. But that's about all there is to these kinds of friendships. Then there are virtuous friendships for Aristotle. Those are the friendships where you have not only that shared vision, that shared goal, that shared insight, but you also have a depth of responsibility to one another. And that depth of responsibility becomes the ground out of which virtue grows. Uh, Real friendships know how to confront one another. They know they're in it for the long haul. So there's an element of trust in virtuous friendships that don't necessarily have to exist in the other two. So for early Christians, the question is, well, is it possible to have that kind of friendship with someone who's not a Christian? The pre-Christian practices of friendship kind of hinge on loyalty. They hinge on the fact that your friends, no matter what type it is, have to be loyal to you. They can't run around stabbing you in the back. They can't run around gossiping about you. They can't run around lying about you. There has to be an element of loyalty for either of those types of friendships to exist and flourish. As well, there has to be some limiting in the number of friendships that you have. Now, in our culture, this is hard to believe because, well, I mean, you can have thousands of friends on Facebook. But the reality is, even psychologically, human makeup is such that you have about 4 or 5 people with whom there is a depth and a level of responsibility and accountability, a depth of honesty, a depth of integrity that will sustain it. Everything else will be one of those other kinds of friendships. This is what amazes me about things like Facebook is we'll call 1,000 people our friends, and then get upset when they post things that aren't quite what you think they should be. Well, it just means you're not recognizing the kind of friendship that it is. There will always be a limited number of genuine friendships that you have. Because genuine friendships demand a demonstration in practical terms. There has to be real values shared between friends. And those values happen in very practical terms. You get down on your luck, these are the people you know you can turn to. You can't turn to a utilitarian friendship with the same level of practicality that you can turn a genuine friendship. This is why Aristotle distinguished flatterers from real friends. Flatterers are the people who will say what they need to say in order to get what they need to get from you, or allow you to get from them. True friends know when to be silent, and they know when to speak up. And they will exercise the two in appropriate turn. By the time you get to the monastic movement in the 2nd, 3rd centuries, particularly with St. Anthony, there is a growing sense of why it is necessary within the Christian community to have genuine friendships. And it's based on that concept that Jesus has. In no greater love has anyone than this, that they will lay down their life for their friends. Genuine friendship, genuine Christian friendship, grows out of the fertile ground of humility. It is putting the other person first. No greater love has anyone than this, that that person will lay down their life for their friends. So ultimately, the humility that makes friendships possible becomes the obedience. I will listen to my friends. They take precedent. I'll go so far as to say that an adequate Christian politics begins here, begins with friendship. Because it's not about our rights, it's about our responsibilities. No greater love has anyone than this, that they will lay down their life for their friends. So there is this renunciation of my will for the good of the other. And that inevitably brings with it, in Christian friendship, a rejection of judgmentalism. I will assist in the growth of my friend, but I will not judge my friend. And there is a stark difference between the two. For Christians, Christian friendship is always first and foremost edifying of the other. And when necessary, we learn to speak the truth. But it's a qualified truthfulness. It's spoken in love. It is not spoken in judgmentalism. And this is where our culture really is not helping us at all in having an adequate concept of Christian friendship. Because we assume that friendship brings with it a truthfulness. You know, I can say what needs to be said, even if that's painful. Well, no. I can say what needs to be said because they need to hear it. But it is always about surrendering myself and my ego and my own will for their good. No greater love has anyone than this, that they will lay down their life for their friends. By the time we get to John Cassian's conferences in the 4th century, there's a really developed concept of Christian friendship. And for Cassian, Christian friendship is between individuals for whom goodness, humility, and selflessness are equally matched. I want you to hear that. For Christian friends, goodness, humility, and selflessness are equally matched. And this is where St. Anthony pulls up Paul's understanding of friendship that's just pervasive in the Philippian letter particularly in chapter 2. There's a couple of verses that Cassian pulls on and makes quite significant for Christian friendship. Therefore, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed me, not only in my presence, but also more now in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Cassian understood that when goodness and humility and selflessness are equally matched, we will work out our salvation with fear and trembling, because it is God that is at work in us, enabling us to both will and to work for God's own good pleasure. The yous in those verses are plural. They're not singular. Being addressed here is the entire community. When we work out our salvation, we are doing so in goodness and humility and selflessness with and toward one another. That is Christian friendship. There's a beautiful book out there. I think it's about 15 years old now, but Paul Waddell developed an entire Christian ethic based around this concept of friendship and the pursuit of happiness that is friends. Friends desire the good for the other. That's happiness. Happiness is that pursuit for the other. If you've never seen Waddell's book, it's a really great book, and I would encourage you to pick it up. So the Christian notion of friendship, again, is between individuals who are equally matched in goodness, humility, and selflessness. No greater love has a person than that they would lay down their life for their friends. That is how we work out our salvation. In John 15, that text, no greater love has a person than that they would lay down their life for their friends, occurs within a section in which Jesus says, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I will send an advocate to teach you those commandments. And I no longer call you servants, but friends." And for friends, there is no greater love than that they would lay down their life for others. This is a concept, this concept of self-surrender, this concept of giving up of ourselves, this concept of our own will dying, that is deeply ingrained in Aristotle's concept of friendship. It is deeply ingrained in how the ancients understood that friends would approach one another, what that love between friends, what that keeping of the commandments of Jesus look like? Well, it looks like Jesus. It learns to speak the language of friendship, which is both frank and loving. It is truthful and loving. This is Jesus' own model with his disciples and how he understands who he is. In John 10, when Jesus refers to himself as the Good Shepherd, that's a concept of both protection and correction. So to build our understanding of Christian friendship, we have to start by looking at how Jesus engaged with others. That's how friendship happens. It's in that connection with others. Well, how was it? It's the Good Shepherd dialogues in John 10. It's the way Jesus walked through the experiences of his arrest, death, and resurrection. When it comes to the resurrection narratives, for example, we tend to glide over it, but the disciples are huddled in an upper room after they've been told that Jesus is risen from the dead. Why are they huddled in a room? Why are they scared? Well, think about what they've done in denying Jesus, in abandoning him at his worst moments, in allowing himself to experience the humiliating death of an insurrectionist at the hands of the Roman political machinery and the Jewish religious establishment, running away in the night. After having debated, well, which one of us is going to deny you? It turns out all of you, but Peter just happens to be the one who's the most vocal. Why are they huddled in an upper room with a door locked? Because if Jesus is really back and Jesus is God, surely God is coming to knock some heads, because that's what happens. If you're disobedient, God is going to wallop you. So they're huddled in this upper room, scared that Jesus is back, and he's going to do precisely what Weird Al's UHF is probably an older reference than any of you are going to get, but in Weird Al's movie UHF, Rambo comes back, and this time it's personal. He's gonna wallop some heads. The understanding is that look at what we've done to Jesus. Well, of course we're going to hide. So the resurrection appearances, you expect God to show up and knock them around a little bit. What is his first word? Peace. Now we tend to spiritualize that and say, well, that's just great. He's back, and he's giving us a sense of solemnity and calmness. That's not the word he chooses. Peace. I am not here to knock heads. And so in his resurrection appearances in the Gospels, Jesus radically redefines the way in which we relate to others. I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. That is who we are. And so our Christian vocation is to give love as freely and as generously without counting the cost or wondering or worrying about whether or not the recipient is worthy of it. We just love freely and generously and gregariously because we're friends. This is what we do. We will give up of ourselves. No greater love has anyone than this, that they will lay down their life for their friends. Christian friendship, both inside the Christian community and toward the outside of the Christian community, is this magnanimous selflessness devoted to goodness and virtue. This is why St. Ambrose says in his address to parish priests, let us reveal our bosom to a friend, and let him reveal his to us. Therefore, Jesus says, I have called you friends, because all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. Therefore, a friend hides nothing. If he is true, he pours forth his mind, just as the Lord Jesus poured forth the mysteries of his Father. Everything about who Jesus is and everything about what Jesus does in the Gospels is an open, full, clear, selfless demonstration of love. That is what Christian friendship looks like. It is living the love that we see demonstrated in Jesus, and it is living that love toward others. It's not about me. It's not about making myself look good. It's not about making myself virtuous. That happens in the gentleness. That happens in the openness. That happens in the giving. That happens in the selflessness. But those are the ends. The virtue is but the means. Christian friendship is nothing other than living the life of God's love we see openly demonstrated in Jesus for the good of others. That is a difficult vocation. That is not an easy way. In fact, in our culture, it is the opposite of what we think is true about individuals. In our culture, friendship is about getting something from someone. Now, there is a type of friendship that is that. It is utilitarian friendship, and it is subpar for Christians. That won't cut it. Living the love of God made known in Jesus Christ, openly, graciously, kindly, magnanimously, living that love is the only thing that will make evangelical witness possible. That is the lesson of the martyrs. Time and time again, the martyrs teach the only way they can go to their death and share the gospel is to do it giving up themselves. No greater love has anyone than this, that they would lay down their life for their friends. Christian martyrdom is the act of Christian friendship. It is the way in which the world will hear the good news. Giving up of ourselves, selflessness, dying to our own will. I'm really going to step on some toes now for preachers. Not preaching your agenda is part of that giving up of yourself, that selflessness, that dying of your own will. Not having your soapboxes. If you have a soapbox in the pulpit, you are not practicing Christian friendship. Christian friendship desires the good of the other, not for our own ends, but for themselves. That's the lesson of the martyrs. Authentic Christian friendship is a sanctifying way of life. Living out that love that we see demonstrated in Jesus Christ, by God, from God, of God. That is the only way you will reach sanctification. That is the primary emphasis of Augustine's Confessions. In the Christian life, the fundamental purpose of friendship is not to bring us satisfaction or success, but to help us grow together in Christ, in order that we might together enjoy friendship with God and the saints in heaven. Christian friendship on earth, in the church, toward the world, for the world, in the good news, is a school for Christian love. Allred of Raloux has a book called Spiritual Friendship. And in that book, he distinguishes carnal friendships, worldly friendships, and spiritual friendships. Carnal friendships are, well, those are the utilitarian sort. Worldly friendships, those are the ones where there's, a lot of camaraderie. There's enough emotion to bind you together, but it's transitory. It doesn't last. It's worldly. And then there are spiritual friendships. Spiritual friendships are where God takes the very ordinariness of our lives, particularly those points where we're most intimately connected with other people, and makes those relationships a sustaining grace in the world. I am who I am as a Christian because of my friends. They are God's gift to my life. They make my life more than it would be on its own. And that is the way God demonstrates God's grace to me in very ordinary moments. Because when you're sitting in a hospital bed and you're waiting on a procedure and your friend pops a head in the door and says, I just came by just to sit and talk, perk you up for a bit. That's grace. That is a spiritual friendship. And that is a spiritual task. It is a discipline to which Jesus himself has called us. I no longer call you servants, but friends. Because in those moments, very ordinary moments in our relationships with others, it's not just you and me. It's you and me and Jesus, always. Christian friendship is made possible because of the love of God we have come to know in Jesus Christ, and how that love pervades in very ordinary moments and relationships in our lives here and now. It makes our preaching possible. It makes our pastoral care possible. It makes our friendships possible. And now we come to the weighty issue of friendships in the parish. What does that then look like for ministers? Unfortunately, for some clergy, friendships in the parish means that we can be, as friendly as possible and as familiar as possible with our parishioners. I've seen this happen where a pastor becomes so closely connected in, quote, friendship that they actually do spiritual damage. Because when that happens, when a pastor and a parishioner become so entangled with one another, the pastor is no longer looking out for the spiritual good of the other. They're getting their own needs met. Christian friendship is supposed to teach us how to care for others for their own sake, not for the goods that I get for themselves. In the company of good friends, we become good people. You will not become good and loving on your own. If you are convinced that once you're a pastor, you will be good and loving and you won't have to have these kinds of friendships, you are dooming your ministry. But do not look for those friends among parishioners. Continually challenge yourself to broaden those borders. Friends don't necessarily look like one another or think exactly the same or do the exact same things. Sometimes there is a radical difference between them. And God will stretch you once you open yourself up to what Christian friendship looks like. You will become friends with people you would not normally think to be a friend to. The clearest example of this is from a Baptist minister in the 1960s who befriended the Grand Dragon of the KKK. When the Grand Dragon of the KKK went to trial, Brother Will walked across the courtroom and dared to sit with the Grand Dragon. And everybody was affronted by Will Campbell doing this. They challenged him. You know, you're a minister and you're standing for the truth of the gospel. How can you possibly sit with that man? Because God loves him. And tells me to love him too. It was not an easy thing for Will Campbell to do, but it was the thing God called him to do. And in doing that, we'll discover just how broad God pushes those boundaries. Will needed the Grand Dragon of the KKK because that's where he saw Jesus. Where do you see Jesus in the people you just simply can't stand? There's a beautiful line in Father Brown, one of Father Brown's mysteries by G.K. Chesterton, where Father Brown says, "My vocation as a parish priest is to remind everyone that they are made in the image of God and therefore loved by God. No matter how big a scoundrel they are. Once you embrace this spirituality of Christian friendship, you will begin to see Jesus in the faces of the people you just simply wouldn't imagine. you'd see Jesus. And in our culture, this is one of the key spiritual disciplines for Christians to recover. You will encounter parishes which are deeply polarized and polarizing. Christian friendship is the only way through that morass. I need my friends to help me see the face of Jesus. And when I'm learning to live of the love of God that I see demonstrated in Jesus and how expansive and unbounded it is, that's when you really get to see just how broad, no greater love has anyone than this, that they will lay down their life for their friends. This is a spiritual discipline that pastors and lay folks alike need to recover in order to make our evangelistic message believable. Folks will say to me, how in the world are we going to deal with all these people that are leaving out the church through the back door? They're just simply not coming back. And in a post-COVID world, this is a real question. What do we do about all the knowns, the people who have no commitment at all? Well, here it is. Christians are not leaving out the back door because they no longer believe. They're not. People are not leaving. They're not abandoning the church because they no longer believe. They're abandoning the church because we're no longer giving them anything to believe in. To make the gospel clearly heard and seen and lived is going to require that we recover the spiritual discipline of Christian friendship. This is absolutely essential for everything you will do as a pastor. In order to see Jesus in your parishioners, you will have to embrace this spiritual discipline. And it is a hard one to embrace because it asks us to give up of ourselves. And in our culture, that is the last thing we're told to do. How then does this reshape what you think about political parties and preaching political sermons about certain political parties or political agendas? Trust me, this will change what you think about what you preach on July 4th. The spiritual discipline of Christian friendship will fundamentally alter your pastoral care and your preaching because it will change what you're actually seeing in the faces of those in your congregations. It will change what you do when you walk into a hospital and see all those folks in front of you. When I visit hospitals, it's an almost all day event. I may go with the intention of only visiting one or two people, but when you become open to this concept of Christian friendship, when you actually start to allow it to saturate who you are and what you do, you're not going to get out the door that quick. It will change the way in which you listen to others. It will change the way in which you speak with others. I would even go so far as to say this is probably one of the most important spiritual disciplines for us to recover in the church today. No greater love has a person than this, Jesus says, that he will lay down his life for his friends. If this is a spiritual discipline you want to pursue some more, there are some really great resources out there. Uh, I really want to highlight the one in the middle there. Companions in Christ is a discipleship resource for groups to use in the parish. It's a really great resource. It's a United Methodist resource. Uh, Discipleship Resources puts it out. This is a great curriculum to look at. If you're not familiar with it, you should be. And I would even go so far as to say your churches should offer it. Uh, there are others out there. I think two here in front of you. Paul Waddell's book on becoming friends, and Mother Francis's "But I Have Called You Friends," both of which are beautiful books. Um, I would I would take a look at those. Millie Ander's book is one that those who've taken theological ethics already know this book. Uh, it's another, but it's kind of dated, so just be prepared for that. But it's still a good book. Uh, Obviously, you're going to have some questions about this one, so be sure to write those down and bring them to class with you. We will talk again soon.